What's up guys, Lifting here. This is an updated video build guide for my dual Flame Totem life-based blood magic build. The build is optimally played as the Witch, but can be played as both the Templar or the Marauder as well, if you prefer. With the Awakening, this build is now even stronger than it was before. It has much more DPS and just as much survivability. Mechanically, the skill gem or the Flame Totem skill gem now also gains projectiles as it levels, which means that the need for greater multiple projectiles is no longer needed as a support gem. And another great change is that with this update, the Flame Totem can now also be obtained and used straight from level 4, which is what you will be doing if you decide to follow this build. And honestly guys, this build is what I consider one of the strongest, easiest, funniest and cheapest beginner builds that you can possibly use. The build is both cheap, effective, and it will carry you all the way to the highest level of maps, while at the same time providing you with excellent clear speed and survivability. So before I show you the skill gem and skill tree setup and all that good stuff, let me give you a short rundown of how the build actually works. The defensive powers of this character lie in having a ton of life, armor, and by actively using endurance charges together with a castman damage taking immortal cold setup, and of course the good old granite flask. This together with the fact that monsters often attack totems instead of you makes this build incredibly safe. The build also uses the blood magic keystone, which means instead of mana you'll be fueling the cost of your skills through your life pool instead. The benefit of using blood magic is that it allows you to focus on what's really important for this build, which is simply life and damage, so you don't have to worry about mana regen and all that stuff. Besides that, using blood magic also enables you to use the Infernal Mantle chest armor in the Clear Mind duel, which both adds a ton of damage to your character, but I will explain how these work later on in the video. I also feel like it's worth mentioning that since you'll be using totems, reflect damage will never be a problem. Totems will reflect damage, but they will reflect it back onto themselves, not onto you. And since you're using totems, you will also with this build have to pick up the Keystone Ancestral Bond. This keystone allows you to have 2 totems up at a time, but in turn it also prevents you from dealing damage with any other attacks or spells. If you want, you can however still use traps or mines, however it is in no way necessary. The totems will do fine on their own. You can still cast curses and all that stuff, you just can't deal damage with spells or attacks. Keep that in mind. I also think it's important to note that Flame Totem does exceptionally well on just a 4 link, so you don't have to worry about getting yourself a 5 or 6 link right to begin with. And at the current state of the build and my character's level, my 5 linked Flame Totem tooltip shows that it currently deals about 15,000 damage for each totem, and this is without taking fire penetration into account and Vol Haste. And while the video doesn't show it right now, reaching about 5,500 HP is more than possible with this build. All in all, it is a very powerful and cheap build to get you going in Path of Exile. So, let me show you the skill gem setup you should use for this character. For direct damage you will need a Flame Totem skill linked with faster casting, fire penetration, faster projectiles, added chaos damage, and lastly Iron Will if you get yourself a 6 link eventually. And before you obtain yourself a 5 link, I suggest leaving out added chaos damage. And this setup works so that faster casting, fire penetration and added chaos damage all directly increases the totem's damage, while faster projectiles also increases the totem's attack range together with an increase in damage. Iron Will works so that the more strength your character has, the more spell damage it will add to your Flame Totem. Next up, to further increase the damage of your totems, you should be using the Flammability Curse, Vol Haste and Herald of Thunder linked with increased duration. Flammability will reduce the resistances of the mobs, thus making them take more damage. Vol Haste will increase the cast speed of the totems, and Herald of Thunder will add a flat amount of lightning damage to the Flame Totem projectiles. And before you ask, then yes, you will be reserving the cost of Herald of Thunder on your life pool, but I will explain this later. It should be said though that this is optional, you don't have to do that. Both Flammability and Vol Haste also benefits from increased duration, and since none of them really require any other support gems, then you might as well be efficient and put them in the same item. And of course the reasoning for increased duration is that it increases the duration of the effect of Vol Haste and Flammability. So next, to improve the defenses of the build, I recommend that you self-cast Enduring Cry to obtain endurance charges and then rely on a cast when damage taken Immortal Call setup to proc whenever necessary. For that setup, you will need a 4-link consisting of Enduring Cry, which you'll be self-casting, then a cast when damage taken, skill gem, Immortal Call, and increased duration. And I recommend that you level cast when damage taken to level 9, Immortal Call to level 11, while increased duration and Enduring Cry can be leveled all the way to max level. This setup will make it so that as long as you have endurance charges up, then whenever you take a bit hit of damage, then the cast when damage taken skill gem is going to proc and cast Immortal Call for you, thus making you immune to any physical damage for a few seconds and giving you time to get into a safer position. And since you have the links for it, I also suggest making use of the Flame Golem. This minion will give you up to 20% increased damage for all your skills, including your totems, whenever it is summoned and alive. To help keeping it alive, I suggest linking it with Life Leech, minion and totem elemental resistances, and minion life. So next up, for extra mobility, I recommend using Lightning Warp linked with faster casting and less duration. Less duration reduces the animation effect of Lightning Warp, and faster casting makes you cast the skill faster. Together these will make your Lightning Warp cast very fast. Now lastly, I recommend an extra Flame Totem setup for the build. And in order to use this, you will need another Flame Totem skill linked with Calling Strike and increased item rarity. The way this works is that every time you encounter a boss or a rare mob and want to increase the chance of the monster dropping something valuable, then as the monster is almost dead, you summon your other Flame Totem, which will then call the monster, thus instantly killing it and providing you with increased item rarity from that mob. This setup is optional, but in my opinion, pretty cool to have. Alright, so up next, let's talk about skill tree progression and how you should level this character. Keep in mind that the type of skill nodes that benefits this build is the ones that provide life and armor to improve our defenses, and fire damage, elemental damage, and cast speed for the offensive capabilities. Besides that, we will be picking up various totem nodes throughout the skill tree to both increase their tankiness but also their damage. Alright, so as I said in the beginning of the video, guys, if you prefer, you can level this both as the Witch, which is what I have done, that you can also level it as the Templar, and you can level it as the Marauder. If you wanted to level it as the Marauder, you would simply be going in this direction, starting up here and grabbing the life nodes. This will give you a bit more of a tanky build with more life and a little more armor. As the Templar, you would have the benefit of being close to Ancestral Bond, thus you'd be able to go dual totem faster, and you would be grabbing this pathway. As the Witch, however, you get a bit more spell damage, and you have access to things such as Shamanistic Fury in the beginning, so you'll have more damage on your totem. You will not be able to get dual totems as fast as the Templar though, but it's completely up to you, whatever you prefer. I decided on the Witch, and now I'm going to show you how I suggest you progress and level as the Witch. And goal number 1 is to get over to Ancestral Bond so that we can level up using dual totems as soon as possible. And the optimal way to do that is by starting here at the spell point node, then grabbing the cast speed, heading into Elemental Dominion for the increased spell damage, cast speed and intelligence, then picking up Shamanistic Fury. At this point in time you will have a Flame Totem, and this will increase the damage of it nicely and increase the totem placement speed, thus simply making it feel nicer to use. After Shamanistic Fury, I recommend going down here, grabbing Retribution for the spell damage and cast speed, then going for Discipline and Training for the life, grabbing Elementalist by going in this direction here because we will later be picking up Light of Divinity. Then you'll go in this direction for Devotion for the life and increase to Strength. Grab the last life point and head into Ancestral Bond. Skip the damage node up here because it isn't efficient compared to the other damage nodes throughout the skill tree. The next goal from here is to grab Blood Magic so it isn't as much of a pain to summon the totems due to the mana cost. From Ancestral Bond you will be picking up Sanctity for the increase in armor and the 1% life regeneration. That's the important thing for us here. From Sanctity we'll move down towards this direction, grab these strength points, head down to Juggernaut for the life and armor increase, and then finally down into Blood Magic. With Blood Magic you will now spend life instead of mana for casting your skills. And since you now use your life to cast your spells, it is really nice to have some life regeneration. This will make it feel much better, and to get some life regeneration along with other bonuses, we're gonna grab Armor Mastery for the increase to armor, the increase to movement speed, and the 0.5 of life regenerated per second. Then after Armor Mastery, I suggest you pick up Warrior's Blood as well for that 1.8 of life regenerated per second and the 20 plus to strength. This helps a ton and will make it feel much better when you're casting spells through blood magic. From here, the next goal is simply to increase your totem's effectiveness, and that means damage and survivability. And to do that, I suggest picking up Ironwood down here for the life, damage, and the notable itself that greatly increases the totem's damage, but also makes it more tanky. And I also suggest picking up the last totem life and elemental resistance node here. In this case, this totem damage skill node is more efficient compared to the other totem damage skill node up here. And that's why we're not picking up this one, but we're picking up this one down here, for instance. After all, we only have so many points to do with. After we've picked up Ironwood, I suggest going back up here where we paved the way before and pick up Totemic Mastery. Now, I personally prefer picking up the skill nodes that grant your totems life and physical damage reduction along with life and elemental resistances. If you prefer, you can of course go for the damage skill nodes. I just personally don't find them to be that efficient, and I would rather spend them on other skill points. From Totemic Mastery, you will be grabbing Constitution for a very nice life increase. Then after having grabbed Constitution, I suggest you pick up Totemic Seal down here. Totemic Seal will make you place your totems so much faster, thus indirectly increasing your damage, and it also makes it so that your spells cast by the totems have 5% increased attack speed, thus directly increasing the damage of the totems. These two skill nodes here are very nice to get as well. They will increase the totem duration and the totem placement speed as well. And while you're down here, I suggest grabbing Sentinel for the increase to armor and 10 to all elemental resistances. Alright, so the next and last goal from here is simply to get more tanky and get more damage. And we do that by grabbing various skill nodes and notables throughout the skill tree. But in my opinion, the best way to grab some more life is by picking up these very efficient skill nodes down here. 10% increased life, 10% increased life, and then Mortal Conviction for 15% increased maximum life. That is very cost efficient. And with Mortal Conviction you also get that 50% less mana reserved, and that is the reason I suggest you can actually use Herald of Thunder. This will make it reserve considerable less life, and because of that I actually feel like the damage from Herald of Thunder is worth reserving that a bit amount of life from. But again, as I said in the beginning of the video, or when we talked about skill points, it is completely optional. You don't have to reserve any life if you prefer not to use Herald of Thunder. Next up, to get some more life, we're going back towards the Templar tree, where we'll be picking up this cast speed node and Light of Divinity. Light of Divinity will increase our spell damage and our cast speed. Very nice. From Light of Divinity, I suggest going in this direction, picking up the fire damage and grabbing Celestial Judgment for the increase to elemental damage and the fire penetration. And now that we are here with Celestial Judgment, I of course also recommend picking up Celestial Punishment, because you will be igniting your enemies even though you aren't critting, especially since you're also using the Flammability Curse. So to make ourselves even more tanky, we're going back towards the Marauder tree, where we will be picking up Heart of the Warrior and the last remaining life skill point. And from Heart of the Warrior, I also suggest you pick up Barbarism for the 6% increased maximum life and the very nice 1+ to maximum fire resistances. And from Barbarism, to get some more damage, I suggest picking up Arsonist for the 8. These two are not too efficient, but because of the notable, it makes it all worth it. Also, the 1% life regenerated per second is again pretty nice when we are blood magic. And to get even more damage, I suggest heading back towards the Witch, start of the tree, picking up Firewalker. And from Firewalker, I suggest picking up Quick Recovery. These 3 skill points are equal to 3 of these 5 life nodes. However, by picking up Quick Recovery, you're also getting that 0.8 of life regenerated per second. So while it doesn't make that much of a difference, it is still better. And now for the final points, I recommend picking up the fire damage node here, then the elemental damage node. Go for Cruel Preparation for the 10% increased maximum life and 5 to all elemental resistances. Grab the last life node, and then finally, go for Heart of the Flame. Each of these skill nodes will increase your damage. And now I should of course mention that as soon as you get a Clear-Minded Jewel and you are blood magic, I suggest that you pick up the jewel slot as soon as you possibly can and then put it into your skill tree. I should also mention that if you at any time need dexterity, then of course don't be afraid to pick expertise, for instance. You can always spec out of it later. And so that's it for the skill tree, guys. Now let's sit over and talk about item and stat priorities. And now the last thing we're going to talk about is what kind of affixes and stats you should aim for on your gear for your character to make your build as powerful as possible. And I should of course mention that being elemental resistance capped is required for this build when you reach Merciless. But when you are resistance capped, these are the defensive stats in priority you need to focus on getting on your gear. First of all, you need to get life on your gear, and I would suggest you try to aim for at least 70 plus on each rare item. Secondly, you want armor to help with damage mitigation. Thirdly, I recommend strength as it provides HP as well, but also boosts your damage together with Iron Will. And lastly, chaos resistance. Chaos resistance isn't too important, so don't spend a lot of currency to try to get that. It should just be considered as a nice additional bonus if you can obtain it. So to improve your damage, your offensive stat priority is as following. Number 1 is increased fire, spell or elemental damage. All of these are equally good, so don't worry about having to pick one. Secondly, try to get added flat lightning, cold or fire damage to spells on your wand or scepter for a massive damage increase. Thirdly, you should try to aim for increased cast speed. As fourth priority, you should get projectile speed. And lastly, increased strength, again because of Iron Will. You also need to be aware that since Vol Haste and faster projectiles has a high dexterity requirement, and you don't have access to much additional dexterity through the skill tree, then I highly recommend that you either craft or buy gear with some added dexterity on it, otherwise you may find it hard to level these skill gems. For this build you should also get 2 Seething Divine Light Flasks, 1 Ironskin Granite Flask, a Quicksilver Flask and either a Ruby, Topaz or Sapphire Flask depending on the content you're farming. Besides that, I recommend crafting the suffix of staunching onto one of the life flasks as well. This will make it so that it stops bleed effects when pressed. And this is very important. And while this build can benefit from multiple unique items, I am in this video only going to recommend 2. The first is Infernal Mantle. This awesome armor will add a ton of damage to your build by providing your fire-based skill gems +1 to levels, additional increased fire damage, and a 25% conversion of your fire damage to chaos damage, which is a damage type that is harder for the monsters to resist. Because this is a blood magic build, it is not possible to be on low mana. Having no mana as we have right now counts as being on full mana. For that reason, we don't suffer the downside of taking 100% extra spell damage as you otherwise would if your build was mana based and reserving auras. With blood magic you basically get all the benefits without the downsides of this chess piece. Now the other unique item I'm going to recommend is the Clear Mind Jewel. This jewel, if you get one with a good roll, can provide you with up to as much as 60% increased spell damage if no mana is reserved. And again, since this is a blood magic build, we have no mana reserved. Compared to any notable in the skill tree, this is an insane amount of extra spell damage. Pretty sweet. And now if you're interested in additional unique item recommendations, then I suggest you go to my official Path of Exile forum post for this build. The link is in the description. In that post I'll recommend a few extra unique items you can add to your build. And now lastly, before I forget it, for the bandit quest rewards you should help Oak on normal difficulty for the extra HP and kill them all on both cruel and merciless difficulty to receive the 2 additional skill points. And that's it guys. Remember, if you have any questions, then the best way to contact me is to join me at my Twitch live stream. The link is below in the description. Otherwise, feel free to ask your questions below in the comments or by going to my forum post on the Path of Exile forums. I'll do my best to answer any questions that haven't already been answered in this video. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?